All right, this is macro unit 2.1 gross domestic product. Okay, so what is GDP? So GDP is the final value of all goods and services produced in a country in a period of 1 year. And economists use this to track if the economy in that country is in a growth or a recession or stagnant. So, some transactions are not included in GDP, and an example of these would be one would be intermediate goods, and an intermediate good is like an input to a final product. So it would be, a part of a car, a transmission of a car produced and then sold to someone who is building a car. You wouldn't include that, you would include just the total price of the final product. Another thing is transfer payments. If you were to, transfer your friend $200, that would not be included. If they didn't perform a service, it would not be included. The purchase and sale of stocks and bonds are not included, and the sale of products that were not created in that year. So if it's a used product that has already been sold before, you would not include that. Okay, so here's a sample question. If you want to go ahead and pause your video to try to figure it out, go ahead. Okay, so the question is the value of which of the following is counted in the United States gross domestic product? Clean air. So clean air is not going to be counted because it is not a product that is bought or sold. Child care, father provides for his child, that's not going to count because there's no money being exchanged. An automobile produced in Sweden by a U.S. firm, that also will not count because it was not produced in the United States. Medical services not provided due preventative health care, that's not going to count because there's not a transaction of money. So the correct answer will end up being D, a car produced in the US and sold in Europe. This is a product that is sold or produced in the United States, so therefore it would count. Okay, so when we're going to calculate GDP, we have to use this formula here called SIG-XM, or C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So the C in SIG-XM is the total consumer spending. So this would be people buying products in the United States or in whatever country we're talking about. Investment. So this does not include stocks and bonds. Notice we talked about that earlier. This would be a company investing in some sort of machinery or something that helps them to produce more goods. Government spending. This would not be government giving money directly to people. This is government spending on projects such as the military or infrastructure, like building more roads. And net exports. So that's going to be exports minus imports. That will be the total number of exports that the country produces. Okay, so here's another sample question, and this question is saying which of these five would go towards a country's GDP. So if you want to go ahead and take a second, pause, and figure out the answer, go ahead. All right, so first of all, we have A, Mrs. Smith purchases a share of stock in an automobile company. This would not count. We don't count purchase of stocks and bonds. A retailer increased her stocks of imported shoes. Now, this would go into the GDP, but it would be actually a negative GDP because importing takes away from net exports, so it would actually decrease the GDP. D, a corporation sells her shoes from last year's industry. The products have to be produced in this year, so this would not count. And a mother sells her car to her daughter. This would not count. Again, this is a used product, so it would not count. So therefore, the answer would have to be C. The government increases its domestic purchases of food for the use of the military. This would go under the G category in SIG-XM. All right, so in this example, we are trying to figure out the total GDP of this country using this chart of information right here. So the first thing we need to do is get our formula, SIG-XM, or C consumer plus I investment plus G government and plus net exports. So the first thing, we look at consumption, so consumer spending. So 3,000, we're going to go ahead and put that in the consumer section. Government purchases of goods and services, $1,000. That's going to go in the G section, government spending. Gross private domestic investment, $700. That's going to go in our investment section right here. Depreciation, this does not fall under this formula, so we don't count it anywhere. Exports and imports, this is going to go into our net exports right here where we have exports minus imports, so 300 minus 500. And then indirect business taxes, that's not going to count, and there's none of it anyway, so that doesn't go in the formula. So here we have this all plotted out, and then if we end up adding it together, we're going to get the total is $4,500, or in billions, that would be $4.5 trillion. Okay, so like we talked about earlier, the GDP can be used to track a certain economy, a certain country's economy, see whether it's growing or in a recession, but you can also use it to compare it to other economies to see which one is growing. So currently, and this was in 2018, but during this time, the United States had a GDP of 19,985, which is bigger than China's. Now, if we go down here, though, we're able to see that the growth rate of the GDP, the United States is not growing as fast. It's growing at a 3% rate per year, which is, it's still growing, so that's a good thing, but China's is growing at 7. So by comparing the GDP, we're able to see that China, while they may be behind now, they are on pace to eventually outgrow the United States.